a slightly Gilbertian attempt at saying the ready to hand and the present to hand through an analogy on um, the metaphysics of Newton. Um, the metaphysics of Newton based on the imaginary concept of the state, which is to be conceived at the beginning of all logic and all uh, thinking of probabilities. Um, just as we construct a distribution probability um, from a simple thing like a coin, such that we get uh, this readily understandable theory of the 50% and the 50%, which, however, are metaphysically questionable because they rely on the idea of a singular matter that can be repeated, which is in physical terms usually given as the notion of the regularity of nature. But the notion of the regularity of nature presupposes the logical principle of identity, that something can be the same, that we can say of two things that they're the same. That precedes the possibility of, if two things can be the same, then we can think up the notion of the regularity of nature keeping certain events stochastically in place, keeping the state where it is. So there's a certain amount of probing possible at the base of the notion both of probability and of logic conceived as what's at the base of probability. And then from here, we enter into all kinds of things which are, just as both those two identity is an idea, it's something we can question. Also, the regularity of nature is obviously something we can question in a different way. So it's like, it's easy to think of events happening that would change the laws of gravity. Easy to imagine, I say. So maybe it will never happen, but one can easily imagine that. It's as though there were a round dial, like on old television sets, and you could click to the different settings for gravity. That's easy to imagine. So the basis for any mathematical theory in Newtonian metaphysics is questionable in multiple ways. It could be wrong about certain things, just as human beings in all times and all places were wrong that the Earth is standing more or less still. But in fact, we're spinning at this very 40,000 kilometers per hour or something, and then moving, of course, and possibly in other n number of other ways that we don't really know, including moving through our solar system. Then you get into actual questions of, for instance, representing the notion of dimension. So this is a long question in recent years. Even Bruno Latour, sort of foppish French public intellectual, has gone into it and seconded the view of Heidegger that Nietzsche speaks of the frog perspectives, that there's different ways of thinking of space, of conceiving of space. So, for instance, probably the most well-known is the Renaissance vanishing point and the perspective, so-called Renaissance perspective. But there's others. Cubist notions of space, which had a pre-runner apparently in a certain period of Chinese art. The whole field of mathematics is the purity of the what is available, understood as available being in the classical way of thinking about it. It's Mathimatikos in the sense of the things that are eternal, and they're guaranteed that they're eternal is because they're available to what Kant would call the pure mind, not invaded by material accident or history in the normal sense. I can always go from 22 to 23 because I don't need any objects, but it's always available to the Socratic mind, that the servant or slave in the Meno is awakened to in the dialogue famously. It strikes to me then that so here's the example I wanted to give. If everything interesting in physics comes between this imaginary realm of the mathematics, where we conceive and produce the notion of n dimensions, 1, 2, 3, and even when we're speaking of the 1 dimension, 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, we're not speaking straightforwardly, but also here of a special determination of what these terms mean in symbols in the conceptual non-existing world of mathematics. Then we construct tight little machines in this world, machines which allow for certain some degree of flexibility, and everything interesting seems to me to happen between the machine, understood as pure for hand and night, pure presence, Mathimatikos, the supposed eternal realm, as it used to be understood before Hegel, of being. But of course, in Hegel, there's no simple being. Being is always an admixture of nothing. It's becoming. First, somebody proposes the buckyball concept, naming it after the geodesic domes of the American architect Buckminster Fuller, and then these get printed up in the textbooks, and then they appear on YouTube videos, and then people hear about some applications of them in MRI machines, or however it is that they're used. There's a movement. There's never the pure presence, which is theorized by the first thinkers. Some movement invades presence, pure presence, in a way when one really thinks about it. But nonetheless, we have this image of what the thing seems to want to say, but maybe it doesn't cohere, that between an experiment, so experiments in real life, they take a lot of people have to be involved, and they're not done that often in physics. But supposing in theory there was a guy that could keep going back and forth between the mathematics and experiments, eventually, and the experiment I would call the Zuhanden realm, and the pure mathematical imagination of a string theory, or however it would be, going back and forth between these would be the presence or the pure availability, just like the 20. You can always go from 22 to 23. You can always go from any number to any number. You don't need any objects to agree with you. As though they were always in their place in eternity. So that's just a meditation to think of Zuhanden and forehand Heidegger ready to hand and present to hand by the examples of mathematical equations, then put to an experiment, and then the guy gets back the result in between, and he keeps running back and forth like that. And maybe, therefore, like von Neumann said, maybe you don't understand, but you get used to it.